are going into the year 2020. And in 1920, the 19th Amendment passed, giving women the right to vote. And so we're going on 100 years, and we're also planning a very big Art Deco week in 2020. It's going to be all about suffragettes. So please book your hotel rooms, hopefully an Art Deco hotel on Ocean Drive. The dates are January 17 to the 19th, 2020. And we have a lot of really fun ideas that we're going to be doing, including, I won't give a preview, but we're going to do a suffragettes parade down Ocean Drive. So save the dates, please. We are just about to get started. I wanted to thank all of you who are members of the MDPL. If you're not a member, you can become a member anytime online at mdpl.org. You can even do it on your phone. It's very simple. And we just had our annual meeting. Any of the board members who were just elected for the annual meeting, please rise and let's give them a round of applause. So I like to say I have 17 bosses, but I'm very proud to work with this amazing group of talented people who are so committed to the mission of the United Design Preservation Law. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Herb Sosa. He needs no introduction, but we're going to welcome him to the stage.
That was quick. Thank you, Daniel. Round of applause for Daniel. Doing a great job. Ladies, come on in. Here, let me hang on. Give us a second. Just sit anywhere on the sofa that you want. You're there. It's all in the mind, exactly. Well, welcome. I'm honored to, first of all, know all three of these amazing women. So this was an easy one for me. And really be nothing short of in awe of them. This is part of a series that Nancy has put together, Nancy Liebman in the center. No, it's not Merle Weiss. Merle Weiss, unfortunately, could not make it tonight. So Nancy stepped in, and I guarantee you there's all kinds of wonderful stuff about Nancy that you may not know. Hopefully you'll learn something about her today as well. You don't know? Okay. Well, we'll do a little brief introduction of each of these amazing ladies up here. Starting with Diane Cameron. Diane is an art consultant, director emeritus at the Bass Museum. Directed the Bass for 26 years during the very difficult years of the Bass that they had. She was associate director at UNDPL. Born on the beach, her grandfather, H. Miller, built the Hotel Victor on South Beach. Talks about, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about multicultural tourism, and Andy Warhol's visit to Miami Beach. Espanol Way, Desi Arnaz, Morris Lapidus, and a lot of other wonderful stuff. Round of applause for this. And on the other end of this wonderful panel up here, we have incredible Barbara Holonicki. Barbara Holonicki is a fashion designer. She was born in Warsaw, Poland. To Polish parents, of course, best known as the founder of the iconic clothes store line, Viva. In 1987, she moved to Miami Beach, Florida, where she opened an interior design business, designing hotels for Chris Blackwell in Jamaica and the Bahamas and here at Miami Beach. She has designed wallpaper for the Habitat store chain in Europe and launched a fashion and home range in India. Wow. And also wallpaper in her widely recognized Art Deco style of Graham & Brown. British retailer Topshop opened a New York City store in April 2009, and later that month launched a collection featuring Holonicki's designs. Round of applause for that. Sorry. Any of you know me, I don't deal with heat well, so. And the third one, I don't need a paper for this one. This is, what can I say about Nancy without getting emotional about her? Nancy is truly an inspiration. She was an inspiration to me. She was one of the first people that I met that cared about preservation, that knew what preservation was, that didn't really care what anybody else thought about her as in regards to preservation. And I've learned so much from her. And I've been honored to follow in her footsteps, stalking her, as the executive director of WPL. I was also honored then to follow her as the chair of the Historic Preservation Board 3 times, I think. I forget the last count. What else? Miami Beach United. Basically, anytime Nancy calls, if she has your phone number, you know this. When Nancy calls, you don't ask. You just, yes, what do you need me to do? And I'm there, and I'm honored to have her on this panel as well tonight. Thank you, Nancy. So, let me ask you ladies a couple of questions here, and there's a mic there that you can share. Well, let's start with, let's see, Diane. Diane, when was the last time you went into the Bass, and how do you feel today when you walk into the Bass Museum?
Oh, I was there. I broke my hip a month ago. That's why I'm hobbling around. But I was there right before I broke my hip. I go there frequently. I love it. It's totally different from when I was there. It's a totally different focus. But I believe in evolution and change, and I'm very supportive of the Bass. And as I said, I go very frequently there.
Well, in that same vein, what would you say is your proudest accomplishment professionally? Your proudest accomplishment professionally?
Oh, that's very difficult to say, but because I've done a lot of different things. I was the director of the Bass for 27 years. Prior to that, I worked in a number of other museums in other cities, not as director, but I enjoyed my tenure in all of those institutions, and I also have taught. I taught history, furniture design. It's like asking a mother which of her children, you like the best or love the most. I had wonderful experiences in all of those situations. So I think getting the Bass to be where it is today has something to do with what I did before. They acknowledged that at the museum, because when I came there, it wasn't an accredited institution, and I sought the accreditation of the museum, secured that, published a number of books about Miami mid-century architecture while I was during my tenure there. Just a lot of things. I met some wonderful people and also had some very interesting experiences traveling internationally on behalf of the museum, bringing exhibitions from major museums and palaces in Russia, for example, right after Glasnost when they opened it up, and you could get almost any kind of art out of there if you could spend the money to do so. And working with colleagues in Russian museums who had one fax machine in the Hermitage, that kind of thing, when we had all of access to so much, and yet understanding all of their achievements despite the terrible conditions under which they were working. I don't know, I just have enjoyed the contacts and the ability to meet people all over the world as a result of the work that I was doing.
One more question for you, I have others. What do you think, how do you feel that art and historic preservation, or architecture, I should say, has molded or changed Miami Beach?
Oh, I don't think there's any question that establishing an historic district had a tremendous impact. And when we were working on that, and I was one of the people that went to Tallahassee to speak before the Historic Preservation Board to get the initial designation, they asked something like that, what would it do for the city? And you know, it was a city without a soul in a way. At the time, they were talking about having legalized gambling, creating canals all over South Beach, so you would have a lot more waterfront property to sell. And when we talked about historic preservation, I remember distinctly one developer who could be unnamed said to me, "What's historic about this? George Washington never slept here." And I said, "George Washington never slept here. That's what's important about it. It's a 20th century phenomenon, a huge development in a very short period of time, and that's what makes it unique." Other people said things like, "Oh, you don't have buildings like the Chrysler Building or, you know, these icons of Art Deco architecture." And in fact, the issue of calling it Art Deco versus modern and all of that was a constant thing with our people in the field. But nevertheless, I said, that's what makes it unique. This is a totally 20th century phenomenon, and there's a lot to be said about the history and the kinds of things that went on to make that happen. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Miss Nancy Lee. Question for you. Well, first of all, why historic preservation? What got you interested? You were so involved in PTA and so many other things before. You've done so many other things. What got you hooked?
That did it. PTA did it because once they get you, they keep you, and you're constantly asked to do this. And I had never thought about doing such a thing. I came here and I had little children and I was raising the children, and the day that they were all in nursery school till 12 o'clock, I went to a meeting, the first meeting I ever went to. And by the end of the meeting, I was the assistant. That was the assistant. You can tell how many people were excited about doing the job. I became the assistant. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it thoroughly. It's how I met everybody. We came from New Jersey in 1959. I had been married 2 years, and I knew nobody there. My husband was training at Jackson Memorial Hospital, so he was never home. So I bought a little dog, and I enjoyed Miami until I had all my children, and then everything took place. So that's how it started. My life was a lot bigger after that.
Okay. So, taking you back to when I first remember meeting you, which was at 661 Washington Avenue, or I think one of our first, not the first, but one of our first MDPL offices. We had that glamorous desk with the water dripped onto every single day. What would you say was the biggest issue facing or challenging Miami Beach, this historic architecture then?
Oh, nobody even knew.
We're getting to you, Barbara. We're getting to you.
No one even knew what historic preservation meant. It was not until a few years later when Barbara Cabotman came along, and she aroused all of those who appreciated the historic buildings. Up until then, I knew where Ocean Drive was, but nobody would go there. It was like it was an old age home. The people who enjoyed Miami Beach during that time were prominent. They ran the city. They elected their own people. And all of a sudden, the little pipsqueaks who were, just young married women raising children came along, and they ignored us. They couldn't imagine what are we doing in Miami Beach. We were there, and we started to really get interested in what was happening, and I'll tell that story after.
So what has changed today? Or what's the same today in challenges to?
The challenges are the same. The people basically did not enjoy preservation. They thought it was silly, as you said. And I know that one of the prosperous people, developers in the community, did a whole thing about how can you told one story about it. You told one story about it. They said, he said, and I will name him with pleasure because even though he didn't get it at first, in the end, he called and thanked me for pursuing it with him. He said, I made him a very rich man. And that was a real compliment. But there aren't that many compliments that come along.
You didn't say his name.
It was one of the biggest developers at the time, Mr. Resnick.
Yes.
The father. And now his son Andrew, is pursuing a lot of good things on Washington Avenue. So it really was a treat, and I'm glad to know that he learned about it through preservation.
Thank you. Ms. Parker, thank you. You also have a very, very dynamic background and certainly came to Miami Beach, I would say, a celebrity long before we had celebrities here. Tell us a little bit about your early years in London and fashion and Biba and kind of how that part of your life developed.
Well, I started after art school. I spent about 4 years going to all the fashion shows in Paris, illustrating, drawing.
Speak up a little bit.
Sorry?
Just speak up a little bit.
Illustrating, because they didn't use photography, and you had 3 months before the press could actually use the styles. Can you imagine? That was happening now. And after that, I met my husband, who was in advertising, and after a while, he said, I think you should go back to designing clothes. And let's start mail order, because it was equivalent to what's going on now online. And we did, and for a while it sort of was like we were selling quite a few dresses through the newspapers, because I had a lot of friends on there. But we were selling, I know it sounds a lot, but like 200 a style, and packing at night and working. It was really tough job. And then we were about to give up, and a friend of mine on the Mirror rings up, Daily Mirror, to say, Barbara, I want to dress. I said, oh yes, I'll do a dress. And what would you like to do? I'd like to do a gingham dress, which is like Bridget Bardot's wearing on Central Pit. And so we made a sample, it was photographed, and we got 11,000 orders, one size, one color. In those days it was a designer's dream, because people were just one size.
Did you consciously transition from fashion to more broader design, interior design, architecture, or other?
Well, that sort of, Biba was always very into the background. It was we grew every 2 years. We took on a bigger shop until we had this incredible Art Deco building, which was going to be demolished, and we saved it. I'd like everybody to know that. 6 floors. And then we had a bad time with the developers, and I got a telephone call one day from one of the Rolling Stones, actually. It wasn't Chris yet. And he said, it was running wood, and he said, oh, come over, I just bought a building.
Wood.
It's
Right.
wood is all the
Of course.
piece. So every 2 years, it was sort of something amazing happening here, wasn't it?
What?
Yes.
Oh, you've got it.
No, please.
No, I just would like to comment. It was at that time, after the film Fashion,
Yes.
things changed. New people came and felt that this needed to be a modern city. And couldn't understand, of course, the preservation. And it became a much bigger fight than the original. It was back in the late 70s, in the mid 70s, that the preservation movement started. And that, he thought, was a torture. But by the time it got to where the end of the fashion, it came and went. I think a lot of it because the city didn't know how to treat it well.
No, I think, honestly, everybody put their prices up, and the fashion people left to go to South Africa.
Right.
So it was cheaper.
Well, Nancy, let me ask you a question, Nancy.
Too bad cheapest is always the best and not.
It was so sad because all the Vogue people went left. You had all the top magazines and all the agencies and top novels here, and then of course everybody disappeared.
Well, I want to get to that. I want to talk a little bit about the marketing, if you will, of the historic buildings. We all know, Mr. Donnelly back there probably could educate us the best, that when these buildings were designed, a lot of the reliefs, a lot of the play of color and shapes were really meant for a slower experience, lights, shadows, not for fast-moving cars. That was the logic, I think, that Leonard used in a lot of ways with developing a new color palette. And I want to talk to you about, Barbara, about that as well, because you did bring a different aesthetic, as an aesthetic that quite frankly was fought, you know, and wasn't always welcomed by the preservationists. So I'd like to talk to you about that.
I'd like to say that I loved.
Give us, first of all, tell us a little bit about some of the projects that that you're proudest of, that probably were the most controversial as well at the time.
Actually, if you see the film, the wonderful film about the gay couple living in the car.
Birdcage, of course.
You get a shot, from aerial shot, all the colors.
Yes.
Like wow. But that's what brought the fashion people in to do photography. And after all, it was only paint.
I love that
But my brief, when I met Chris Blackwell, who is from Jamaica, and he said to me, I want Jamaica on the beach. Hello, I want color. And that's when you got color.
So talk to me about the Netherlands Hotel. That I think was probably where you were criticized, I would say, the most, that in my memory. Not all you, but certainly there were things done to that building. There were additions,
I think that
added. Yes, Ira's back there. I purposely wasn't going to call him out, but now that you have. And it's all in the perspective, quite honestly, because I think the conversation would be very different today than what it was then. But take us back there. Take us to that point of balancing what you believed to be completely appropriate and right and the right thing to do, but how was that received?
It was terrible. And I must say, Craig Roberts, who was Chris's partner, said, it's only paint, stop it. But nothing was ever touched as far as the architectural bit, the actual building. Like it's demolishing now, and ghastly things are happening now.
Can you elaborate for people that may not know what we're talking about the color palette of the Netherlands and some of the materials and why it was interpreted as controversial or less than historic preservation at the time?
Because it was Jamaican colors. And as Chris bought like 10 buildings in one go, and he said, would you like to do 10 buildings? I said, I want Jamaica. Okay, you get Jamaica.
Talk to me about the Marlin Hotel.
Oh, the Marlin was the best, yes. And
What was your favorite element of that building?
it was an absolute
It was amazing, yeah.
wasn't it? I mean, when you walked in there, once it was done up, it was a studio style below. It was just full of style, of music style. And you were laughing with Madonna, Beyonce, Bono, everything. I remember sitting next to this little boy at one party at Chris's place, and I said, who's this little boy? And it was this little well, they felt very happy there. They were working there. It was very exciting time. It was Mick Jagger, there were parties there, darling.
So, Barbara, if you were, let's say you hadn't stepped on Miami Beach, Woody had not called you to do the club. If you were hired today to come to Miami Beach, and in essence do the same work that you did then, how would it be the same? Would it be different? What would you do today with architecture in the historic districts?
The ocean drive to the
I'm sorry.
absolutely as a whole picture, really. And not some of the horrible things that happen in Washington now as well. Not certainly yeah. Like the Nassau is being ripped apart. It's terrible. Okay.
No, that's fine. One more question for you. What's your favorite color, Barbara? It's not pink. It's not pink. Okay. That's good.
No, I do think Horowitz colours was magic. They were really beautiful. They were just so nice colours.
You're referring to the Leonard Horowitz's color palette that he developed.
Just they were fabulous.
Well, they were mostly based on the terrestrial floors and the sunsets and the natural elements that he saw.
Yeah. But they didn't, the sun is so strong here that it doesn't stay that way.
It's only pink, Barbara. It's only pink.
Yes,
It's only pink. Yes.
Sorry.
Just to comment on that, when the color palette came out and Leonard came to show it to the planning board, I think they were, that's what they called themselves. And they took one look at what he had done. He said, those colors are a disaster. They look like in a poorhouse you could have those colors. And if you think about that, and you see the colors we have now, I mean, it was amazing. And he said, and the preservation has to go. It's nonsense, the preservation. That was the continuing comment, the preservation. Then they started to call it the P word has to go. But it didn't go, and we kept on, and we did it.
Well, in fairness to Barbara and her group, there were others. There was also Victor Fariñas, who was very much into the Memphis style at the time. I'd like you to elaborate a little
Oh,
bit.
yeah, I can't elaborate on all of the styles. You know what you
I want to put this in context.
Right.
When I returned to Miami Beach in 1978, everything was painted beige and brown. That was the color palette for Miami Beach, for South Beach. And what Leonard did probably wasn't historically correct, because there were other pastels that were used in the 20s and 30s and so on. But what he did do was create this very dramatic change and enlivened the environment by doing so. But that's the story. Everything was beige and brown, and we used to say it's the browning of Miami Beach. You know, it just was drab, and that, you know, the colors there's a fashion to colors. There's something called Pantone, and every year says, oh, this is the color of the year. Well, in those days, beige was color. Interior designers used it in their decor. Everybody was using it. So it was considered the epitome of good taste. And when Leonard came along and did this outrageous palette, that was considered tacky and terrible. But that's really what it was about.
So Diane, speaking of drab colors and buildings that were a little run down, talk to me about the Victor Hotel. Talk to me about your memories. How far back? I know your grandfather, I believe?
My grandfather built 75 of the Art Deco buildings, actually. He came to Miami Beach in 1924 from Akron, Ohio. He had been a developer there, and there was a building boom going on. This was, before the hurricane of 26 and before the Depression. So there was a big building boom going on, and he became a part of that, and he did build a lot of hotels, not just the Victor. But at any rate, as far as the Victor was concerned, the Victor was a hotel, and this is where Barbara embellished things. Barbara painted this picture of glamour and, flying down to
Barbara Capita.
And in fact, the Victor was a winter resort for Jewish people who came down, spent the high holy days and different holidays, and had a kosher restaurant there, and so forth and so on. It was glamorous in its way. I have to say, when they redid it, I haven't been in it in a long time. I once asked to go there for a birthday brunch, and I went into the lobby, and there were all these jellyfish. Remember the jellyfish that were in the lobby there? The jellyfish era. I don't know what decor they have now, but I thought it was interesting to see these jellyfish floating in the lobby. But what it did have was, it had original mural.
They were always on
muralist. And by the way, my father came to Miami Beach in 1925 from Western Canada. He was an artist, and he painted murals in some of these buildings, but they don't exist anymore. And later on, he became a contractor and so on and so forth. But anyway, my family was involved in the building boom of the 20s, and then came the hurricane, and then came the Depression. But the phenomenon of Miami Beach is that even during the height of the Depression, in the 30s, there were people who had money, and they were largely what we call cloak and suitors from New York that came down with money in their pockets that they had made one way or another during World War I, outfitting soldiers' uniforms, whatever it was. And they came with money, and they built these buildings. Now, the buildings themselves, you have to know how the platting of Miami Beach is. There are narrow lots that are deep, and everything goes on the facade. There's nothing special on the sides. They don't have, interest, all of the three-dimensional interest. It's like a big billboard advertising itself. That is why when Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi came here in the 70s, they observed and loved it and talked about how Miami Beach architecture was a progression starting down at the bottom of the beach, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, going on up the beach to the Fontainebleau Hotel. Speaking of the Fontainebleau, I remember once I was interviewed during this time, and somebody said a reporter from a New York paper said to me, did I think one day the Fontainebleau Hotel would be on the National Register? And I said, absolutely. I said, that's a very iconic building. It's part of our history. It has all the ingredients for historic preservation and designation. Morris Lapidus himself, when he was closing his office, I zoomed in to see if I could get any drawings and things for the Bass collection. on architecture and design in Miami Beach. And he said, why would you even want my things? He was very depressed. You know, he hadn't been named an American treasure by the, you know, the Smithsonian and all of that. And he in fact, was denigrated by the architectural critics of the day, like Louise Huxtable wrote these terrible articles. Even Frank Lloyd Wright, when he came to Miami Beach, said it was a terrible place with awful architecture and so forth. I mean, you know, Frank Lloyd Wright could be wrong.
And he never built as many buildings as many of the other architects that did here on the beach. Nancy? Oh no, I thought you were going to say something. I can ask, or you can just talk.
No, I'm just, as I sit here, I think about things from back then. I was so excited about doing this so that people who haven't been here a long time, and it's been a long time since we were all even here, and I thought about some of the wonderful things that have happened. Way back when Diane was still at the museum, you had a party down there on the bay, if you remember. It was a party, I don't know who it was for, but I went. And the director of Art Basel was there. You remember now, Art Basel. And at the time, I didn't quite know what Art Basel was. My family, who were into the arts, when they heard Art Basel, they just went to the roof. They were so excited. So I questioned them. They wanted to come to the city and host an Art Basel show. The city was still brown and tan, and that's how they acted, because they said, we can't have another art, they called it a fair, an art fair. We can't have another art fair, we have one already. And with the regulations for how you get into the city's, on the city's agenda to even be allowed to create a fair. As far as the arts, if you had an art fair, you had 75 days out one way and 75 days out the other way. I think it wound up in the middle of August that they said they might have room for this wonderful show that was coming. And we had to go back to the city hall and urge the elected officials at that time to think about changing the method of how they select art. And it was one of the biggest, ugliest times. We had to go near and far to get the right people who would change it, including the people who ran, who managed the shows that were coming. They were all locked in by the old crowd that were here before us, well before us. They were still managing it. Well, after pushing and shoving for at least a couple of years, we finally brought Art Basel here. And it is one of the things that motivated the rest of this city to grow into an adult city. Up until that time, it was just playtime, and nothing was happening, and it was all scattered. The big thing was going to the Fountain Blue, the Fountain. So that was one of the greatest things that came about because of it.
Without question, I don't think anyone would disagree that Art Basel has certainly matured our community. It certainly has catapulted the mentality and just the whole livelihood, if you will, of South Florida. I want to go back to, you mentioned the party. No, keep it right. Yeah, because you are the history of Miami Design Preservation League. Of Miami Design Preservation League. And I want to jar your memory a little bit. Two parties in particular take us back to when we closed down Ocean Drive for the Mudo Miami Ball. And the other one, when we were Miami Ball with Cat Calloway on Lincoln Road. Share those stories.
Fabulous Cat Calloway. It was just amazing to see him performing here in Little Miami Beach.
He was from, do you remember that?
So it was.
Really?
But at Cat Calloway and what else?
The other Miami Ball were on Ocean Drive.
The Miami Ball. We closed. Oh, we closed another. It was a torture. It was another torturous moment trying to get Collins Avenue to close just where the Essex House is. That's 10th Street. Close it off just one block. Took the whole round. There wasn't the traffic problem at that time. And we had the entrance, we had to come to Collins Avenue, to walk through Essex, we had this ramp and something, and keep going across Collins Avenue. And the big party has been well, they changed the name to Fairview. It was called the Fairview. The reason it had to change was because the federal government had a law that you couldn't copy names. There's a lot more to it, but that was it. You couldn't copy names, so the Port Fairview had to change its name to Fairview. And that was really what it was wonderful. We had all of that, and it was mostly locals who came. That was the other nice part of what was going on. We loved the tourists, but we knew that somehow we have lost that flavor. And I hope we bring it back as we continue to promote the architecture district for a long time to come, not the end of it.
I have two more questions for each of you, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. Okay? Nancy, Michael, will start with you. Two questions. First of all, what do you see a future for historic preservation in Miami Beach, and what does that look like?
As long as Daniel and I are here, there is a future for Miami Beach. Daniel and the board and all of you who come to support it, there is a future. But the future is constantly, and you have to push to have it done. Someday come to a city commission meeting where there is a preservation issue on the agenda and see how it is or is not welcomed. And it starts from there in order to keep the movement going. So that, and we depend on all of our board members and all of the people who attend our events to help us push it. I was afraid to go. I was followed my husband like a shadow, and when I started with the public expression, I got involved with the PTA. I did all the things you do as a PTA president, including president of the PTA of the 3 schools. And then I worked on getting I'm trying to put them in order, and I can't. But we put together so many things that I can't remember. You might remember, since I'm a little older than you, and I don't remember anything. But I hope people will remember what I did to help make this city unique and exciting and beautiful.
Barbara, same question for you. Same question for you. Your legacy, what would you like as it relates to Miami Beach? You've done so many incredible things.
So we used to come here in 68, 69, when the director was Unsung. We discovered the beach, and we were told we had to spend all our time in the vintage shops, which were pleasant, and everybody loved it. Recently, my friends who are usually very good with architects and so on say, oh, it's really not that. And then they come out here and they go, yes, that's not very good. No.
But you shied away from my question. What would you like when someone is here talking about Barbara Helenicki's contribution to Miami Beach 40 years from now? What would you hope they would say about you and your contribution?
What I love about Miami is there's no yesterday, it's all tonight. And now we're just discovering Marlin, the magic of the Marlin and the music people, the people that were there. We're discovering that I love. So, the rest is just junk.
Well, I like to think that part of my legacy would be that a city that didn't have a good self-image when I returned to it in 1978 was able to develop one and establish itself as having unique and I'm going to call them mesmerizing to a lot of people, qualities that drew all kinds of people here, like Barbara and other people over the years, that I somehow contributed to that by, in the early years, being involved in historic preservation, standing out on Washington Avenue. And I have to tell you, it was a lot of fun. It was the kind of counterculture thing that we were doing. We were protesting the tearing down of the New Yorker. You know, it was an era following the 60s protests of students and people all over the world for political reasons, for anti-war demonstration, whatever. And we were protesting tearing down buildings. So I like to think that by doing that and helping to push along the idea that here was something special and different about the city, I like to think of that as part of my legacy.
Excellent. Before I open it up to the audience, I'll share something that I shared with you earlier, and that was why I asked the three of you that question. A 16-year-old boy that was doing an arts renaissance fair on Española Way when Española Way was completely boarded up. There were, people would offer you money to walk from one end to the other of the Española Way without getting mugged or killed or something. And that 16-year-old boy was me, and I was creating jewelry, who would have known. And I sold a piece to you, and I knew who you were. You had introduced yourself to me. I thought I had made it. That was it. I was like the next rising artist because you had purchased a piece from me, and I was so in awe of you. And I truly could not possibly be more humbled to follow in the footsteps.
So, but Andy was so enthralled with that place, and I could never prove this, but he was a friend of Johnny Versace, and I think he passed along. You know, there was this place in South Beach that you would love, of course. You know, the rest is history. He bought it, and he was murdered on the steps, that whole story. But there's a lot about that tour that I think had lasting references, including that, I believe.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question?
Wait, I'd like to hook on to the cookie jar story. I was an amazing cookie jar collector. I wound up with about 125 or whatever. I loved them. I had to distribute them when I moved because I couldn't even handle a lot. But anyway, I used to pick them up at flea markets, for maybe $2, $3, $10 the most. All of a sudden, he came, Andy Warhol, and he had an enormous collection himself. And he put the collection on to be sold. He had an auction, And I sent my daughter over there. I said, $250 period, do not spend another dime. She called me back and she said I'd have to go a heck of a lot higher than $250. They were selling his cookie jars for $10,000 and people were buying them. I still have palpitations when I think about it.
All right, any questions from the audience?
Well, again, like her, when I moved here in '91, the first two people I met, I became a docent at the Bass. So Diane was teaching me all about the Bass and the art, and it was amazing. And I lived around the corner, so I could just walk there. And of course, when I called the MDPL if they needed a volunteer, Nancy answered the phone. And of course, with Barbara, I wore my colors tonight for her because I know that she loves color. And even though other people may have rejected her, we had a great relationship all those years. But I worked there from '91 to '98, and Diane, you hosted many of the membership meetings for MDPL, and Nancy, you brought in so many great speakers. And I had a birthday party at the Marlin, and believe it or not, Grace Jones came, so I can thank you for that as well. But I'm agreeing with all of you that I think today, it's horrible what's happening. And I see high rises, even if it's only 10, 12 stories. I mean, I don't think people study the Art Deco District. Anybody on a commission or anybody anywhere study what a historic district is or what it means or what's anything. They just think they can tinker with this. And if they took a tour, they might find out they're going to go back to what it was like when it was empty 50 years ago, because they don't really know. They remind me of the people that you were describing, because all the people that are in government today are from here. And I think they take it for granted, these old buildings, like I grew up with them, like you heard when you were trying to change minds way back then. So I think it's really scary what's happening. And, you know, I'd love to tell them it's like they inherited the pyramids, and they've decided that if they put a restaurant in the back of it where no one can see, who would care? And that's what I think is happening, that they're thinking they can, you know, just save a doorway and then they've, you know, they're preservationists. So it's pretty scary. I just don't know if you want to comment a little bit about, you know, today and the situation.
I think what ruined Miami was the fact that when the people came in to do the Ocean Drive, the little hotels, they had to rent out the restaurants to people, and that's why it's so tacky. It wasn't the actual people who owned the hotel that ran the restaurant, and that's what's absolutely ruined it. I hope they'll be able to help to it.
The other thing I would say about, I agree with you, but when I first came back and we started working on the district, you weren't allowed to have restaurants outside at all. On Lincoln Road, you could not have outdoor cafes. You couldn't have, I remember somebody at the, where were we? Oh, the hotel that was the first headquarters of MDPL, refresh my memory of somebody. Anyway, we wanted to have a restaurant there, and somebody did this little neon deco sign, very artistic, and the city made us take it down and said you can't have an outdoor cafe. It was against the zoning, whatever, you know, on Miami Beach. So I agree with you about them having to do that, but on the other hand, those places, I guess, draw people to Ocean Drive, for better or for worse.
Those frightening drinks they have.
All right, any other questions from the audience? Going once, going twice. All right, well, thank you to